Hey guys, tonight we drift gently across the frozen edges of time to a land wrapped in silence, where sky and earth blur into white, and the only sound is the wind weaving slowly across snow. Long before cities or clocks or written names, small bands of early people wandered through this quiet landscape. When the wind drifts from them, it carries a breath of frozen time, whispering stories that have no words. The people who live in this place are few. They don't hurry. They don't carve their names in stone. They walk with the rhythm of the land, unhurried, quiet, like shadows on a snow-covered plain. The branches are heavy with snow, and the air feels stiller here, as if sound is holding its breath. Another taps a flint edge into sharper form. Near the fire, an elder holds a clay bowl filled with melted snow, warmed gently, sending curls of steam upward. Even the animals seem quieter here, like part of the snow. The world holds stillness, the way a bowl holds water gently, with care. There is no disturbance, only participation in the hush. They follow the trails of steam with their eyes, watching as it vanishes, as if following a memory back to the sky. They are not wished upon, not named. They are remembered. They are known. They guide with their stillness, their quiet insistence on presence. These stars do not promise. They simply are. And that is enough. Let the air grow colder, not with fear, but with wonder. Let your thoughts quiet, like the wind moving gently across a frozen plain. You don't need to follow every step. You only need to rest beside them here, beneath this wide glacial sky. Nothing urgent waits. Nothing loud calls out. Just this soft and steady hush, stretching to the edges of memory. Time passes in the fall of ash, in the soft crackle of wood. Each footstep, each breath, each spark from the fire is part of a rhythm older than words. These people are not building a future. They are living a moment. They are not inventing or conquering. They are listening. There's no signal, no command, yet they begin to make camp. Skins are stretched between tall sticks. Stones are cleared for fire. A shallow pit is dug. The stars still hang like beads of frost above you. Shadows lengthen, and the fire becomes the center of a slow-moving world. Each person moves slowly, resting between bites, breathing deeply. There is no urgency. Hunger is met not with greed, but with presence. When the food is gone, they sit still, watching firelight flicker. One person leans back and closes their eyes. Others follow, drifting without needing sleep, but finding rest. The flames cast a warm circle that glows on faces, fur, stone. A pot now hangs above the heat, filled with roots and bone, simmering into warmth. The scent is simple and grounding, soft and slow. A small flame is coaxed from kindling, and smoke rises in a thin line before dissolving into sky. With soft footsteps and stone tools in hand, they walked beneath a sky of ice and stars. Their clothes are stitched from fur and hide, each layer soft and thick. They walk in silence, their eyes watching the ground ahead. No one speaks, but they know the path. They read the slope of a hill, the direction of the wind, the color of the sky. Their steps leave barely a mark. Soon, even those are covered by wind-blown snow. The wind sings a soft song against the sides. Inside, warmth gathers from furs and shared breath. A child stirs, murmurs faintly, then goes still again. Coals glow low in the darkness. Quiet red pulses like tiny heartbeats. The world outside holds its breath. Let's follow them, calmly and slowly, into the softest corners of the Ice Age, where stories sleep beneath snow. Bubbles are trapped beneath the surface like tiny moons in a frozen sky. One person pauses, kneels, and places a gloved hand against the ice. Beneath, the water is still flowing, slow as breath in sleep. The traveler lingers a moment, feeling the cold through layers of skin and memory, then rises and moves on, leaving only warmth behind. The world is colder, wider, emptier. The land stretches in every direction, blanketed in snow so deep it swallows sound. Pale sunlight glows through a silver-gray sky, never quite strong enough to melt or warm. The cold is constant, but not cruel. It moves slowly, settling like a breath over everything. Pine branches bend under the soft weight, and even the birds fly lower, closer to the trees, as if whispering with their wings. Glaciers rest in the distance, massive and unmoving, like mountains that forgot how to rise. They press against the horizon in silent stillness. A small group of travelers moves slowly through a valley of snow. They pass a stream frozen in motion, its ripples captured in glassy stillness. Later, the group reaches a clearing where trees gather like silent guardians. Around the fire, work begins. One traveler gently scrapes a strip of hide, pulling the tool with slow, careful strokes. A bird sits on a high branch, unmoving. Far away, a fox watches from the tree line, its breath visible, curling in the air. As daylight fades, the snow turns a gentle lavender. Beneath the stars, the people eat. There are no words, only the quiet sounds of bowls being passed, spoons scraping lightly. One by one, they enter their shelters. Above them, the stars return. Just a few, but enough to draw a path across the sky. In this place, time slows. The snow does not fall in a rush, it drifts, like a memory trying not to be forgotten. And now you can too. Let yourself drift with them. The fire burns low now, but it still glows. And the snow still holds its breath. So breathe gently, the world is still, and so are you. The wind rises softly over a land of white, brushing across snowdrifts that stretch without end. In the far north, where the sea once stood, a bridge of ice and earth has emerged. It reaches from one world to another, wide and silent, veiled in mist and winter light. Beneath the pale sky, the land is neither entirely sea nor entirely earth. It is something in between, a place of passage carved by ancient ice. They called it Beringia, though no one called it anything then. It was not marked on a map, and there are no names for the valleys or inlets, the ridges or frozen rivers. It simply existed, waiting to be crossed by those who moved with the slow rhythm of the earth. Beneath their feet, the ground was solid, packed with frost and memory. The snow above was soft, dusted gently by the breath of time. The travelers arrive with no ceremony. There is no line drawn between one land and the next, only a gradual change in the air, in the way the wind carries the scent of salt from a frozen sea. They walk as they always have, wrapped in fur, moving in quiet groups, watching the horizon with calm eyes. The first steps onto this new expanse are careful, but not afraid. The land is open, still, and waiting. Their boots press into the snow with gentle crunches. The sound is soft, repetitive, like a drum made of frost. Each step leaves behind a print that begins to fade as soon as it's made. The path forward is clear, yet undefined. They walk not toward a place, but through one, carried by instinct, by the changing seasons, by the quiet pull of what lies ahead. Mornings on Beringia begin not with sunrise, but with a slow brightening. The sky grows pale like smoke, then softens into pearl. Snow reflects every faint shift in light, and the world glows. Steam rises from mouths with each breath, curling into the cold. Faces remain calm, weathered, wrapped in fur. Children walk between the adults, small shadows in the snow, stepping carefully in the footprints left ahead of them. When they rest, they do so without urgency. They find a patch of land where the wind breaks slightly and begin again the ritual of warmth. Stones are gathered, fire is sparked. A skin is stretched as a windbreak. A pot is set to boil with snow and bits of dried root. The flames flicker low, not bright, but steady. Around them, the snow deepens and the mist hovers close to the ground like a sleeping creature. The air is never loud. Even the wind, though constant, is hushed. It moves across the frozen plain like a long sigh. The only other sounds are the quiet rustle of fur, the click of bone tools, the low bubbling of water over fire. Words are few and spaced far apart. Most things are communicated in movement, in gesture, in the simple act of preparing and sharing. Days pass slowly, marked only by the changing shape of the sky. The light never climbs high. It glows in a shallow arc, then fades into dusk. When the sun does appear, it is pale and rimmed with frost, casting no heat, only the softest shadow. They continue walking, always forward, always together. Their shapes move across the vast whiteness, like brushstrokes on a blank canvas, delicate and purposeful. Sometimes they pause at ridges where they can see farther. The land ahead folds gently, with frozen marshes and low hills hidden under snow. To the east, nothing rises. To the west, the air grows saltier. Far below the ice, ancient waves still remember the ocean. But up here, only silence. The travelers rest their eyes on the open distance, then descend again, each step a note in a quiet song of movement. At night, they settle under the same sky, the same stars. There is no difference in the cold between this land and the last, only a deeper stillness. The tents are arranged in a half circle around the fire, low to the ground, held down with stones. The fire glows softly, casting shadows on the snow like moving branches. Someone adds dried moss and lichen to keep the flame alive. Sparks rise and vanish into the dark. Inside a tent, the warmth grows slowly. Breath forms tiny clouds that hang in the air before fading. A mother pulls a fur blanket around a sleeping child. Another traveler turns a pouch of hot stones to warm hands and feet. There is no hurry to sleep, only the slow drifting into it. Outside, snow falls in fine flakes, too small to hear, settling gently on everything it touches. Sometimes the mist is thick. It moves like a river across the plain, erasing landmarks, softening the edge of the world. The travelers wait when it becomes too dense, not out of fear, but out of patience. They sit close, sipping warm liquid from carved wooden cups, hands wrapped around the heat. They listen to the quiet, to the sound of snowflakes landing on fur, to the creak of ice shifting far beneath them. The mist will clear eventually, and when it does, they will rise again. The path ahead may look the same, but it always holds some small difference, a new rock, a new scent in the wind, the faintest ripple in the snow that suggests an old trail. These things are read like books without pages, felt more than seen. And the journey continues not toward conquest, but toward continuation. The crossing is not fast. It is not meant to be. It unfolds in days and weeks, in steps and pauses, in meals and firelight. The land is not hostile, only quiet. And in its quiet, it offers space to breathe. Each night, the same stars return, familiar and distant. Each morning, the same breath of cold air greets them, unchanged. Yet something within shifts, grows more attuned, more still. This was the path to a new world, though they didn't know it. They were not discovering anything. They were simply moving as living things do, from one season to another, from one sky to the next. The earth beneath them was ancient, but the snow on top was new. And with each step, something old and something new moved together across the silent white. Let yourself walk with them, slowly, calmly. Let the cold not frighten you, but soothe you. Let the snow stretch endlessly ahead, not as a barrier, but as a comfort. There is no destination you need to reach, only the next step, the next fire, the next sleep beneath stars, and through it all, the frozen crossing continues. The wind moved quietly through the hollows of the frozen land, weaving between low hills and smooth, snow-covered ridges. In this wide, still world, there were no towering trees or standing stones, only soft shapes of white that bent with the seasons. It was here, among the gentle slopes of ice and packed earth, that the people began to build their resting places not of walls and corners, but of curves and comfort, shaped by patience and time. They found moss first. It grew in quiet clumps between stones, where the sun lingered just long enough to coax color from the cold ground. Though small and unassuming, the moss held warmth. When dried, it was light and soft, easy to press between hands, easy to carry in bundles wrapped with sinew. They gathered it slowly, never taking too much from one place, always leaving a patch to grow again when the snow returned to water it. Their shelters began not with construction, but with observation. They watched the wind, noting where it curved and where it paused. They looked at how snow piled in the corners of the land and where it swept clean. Then, using what they saw, they chose places where the wind broke gently behind a rise. In the crook of a frozen hill, beside a line of driftwood long buried in frost. These were the spaces where warmth could last a little longer, and sleep could come a little easier. The first shape was always a circle. It echoed the sun, the moon, the nest of birds, the hollow of caves. A circle gave no corners for wind to catch. It welcomed heat in the middle and spread it evenly outward. Around this idea, they shaped a ring of stones, pulled from frozen ground with hands wrapped in hide. The stones were not large, only steady enough to anchor what came next. Over the circle, they stretched hide. These came from animals long remembered, mammoths, caribou, musk oxen, whose fur still carried the scent of open plains. The hides were cured with smoke and snow, stitched with tendons soft in water and pulled tight by hand. Laid over curved wooden frames, they formed low domes, warm and wind-resistant. On the inside, they added moss, pressed into crevices, layered like insulation, soft and dense. Some shelters used ribs from large beasts as support. The bones arched like branches, strong and curved, and they held the weight of snow without protest. The snow, in turn, acted as a second skin. It pressed gently over the structure, sealing out wind, holding in heat. From a distance, these homes nearly vanished into the white, becoming part of the land itself, shaped by it, and returned to it when the thaw came. Inside, the air was still. A fire burned low in the center, its smoke drifting upward through a hole near the top, shaped carefully to draw breath without letting in the cold. Around the fire, people sat or lay on furs, layered thick over earth warmed by stone. There were no sharp edges, only curved soft corners, rounded bones, the gentle bend of backs at rest. The shelters were not meant for permanence. They were not carved to last for years, but to hold warmth through nights. They moved when the herds moved, folded in on themselves, packed away with the rhythm of the seasons. But while they stood, they were complete worlds within worlds, small and sufficient, holding the lives of those who passed quietly through time. Children would wake to the sound of fire crackling low. The warmth was close, just enough to soften the chill, but not chase it away completely. Outside, the snow whispered softly against the hide walls, a sound like breath. They would sit up slowly, eyes adjusting to the dim orange light, and watch the adults prepare food, using bone spoons and stones warmed by the coals. Tools hung from loops of sinew along the curved wall scrapers of antler, knives chipped from obsidian, small carvings of animals and flowing forms. Each one had a place, chosen not by chance, but by habit. There was no clutter, only purpose. When one object wore down, another was shaped with care and thought. These were not lives of excess, but of precision and peace. On days when the wind grew too strong to travel, the shelters became everything. Inside, stories were traced in the air with fingers, not told aloud, but drawn slowly for others to watch. Shadows from the fire danced on the inner walls, flickering over moss and fur, casting soft patterns that lulled even the restless into quiet. Time slowed. There was no schedule, no list, only the gentle passing of light and heat and hunger and rest. When food was ready, it was shared with no need for words. Pieces of dried meat, softened with steam, were passed hand to hand. A broth of snow water, roots, and marrow warmed the fingers that cupped it. Everything was eaten slowly. There was no rush, no expectation. Meals were not events, but pauses, moments of togetherness, quiet and full. In the darkest parts of winter, the shelters became lanterns. Their glow was faint, but it reached into the snow and cast a quiet comfort. From outside, a distant watcher might have seen only a low rise in the land, a bump in the frost. But closer, they would have heard breathing, the sound of tools against hide, and the gentle crackle of fire, a pocket of life in the wide white stillness. At night, sleep came in layers, fur against skin, moss beneath bones, heat from stones wrapped in hide and placed by feet, the breath of others near, rising and falling, matched by one's own. The darkness was not empty, but full of calm. Outside, the wind might blow, but inside, time melted. There was no fear of tomorrow, only the long, slow now. When the days warmed, the shelters were unmade just as slowly. The moss was shaken out and left to return to the land. The hides were rolled carefully, the stones left in a circle for others to find, or for no one at all. Nothing was wasted, and nothing stayed behind that wasn't part of the land to begin with. The people moved forward once more, as they always had, leaving only impressions in the snow that would vanish with the next storm. And in their place, the land remained quiet, white, watching, ready again for the next shelter to rise, for moss to be laid, for the soft glow of firelight to return under the curved hide. There was no final home, only resting places, shaped with care and left without noise. Each shelter a breath in the long, slow story of the ice. The air inside the shallow shelter was still, broken only by the slow breath of fire. It crackled quietly in the center of the space, casting amber glows upon the stone walls and the firs that lined the ground. Shadows danced gently, stretching and shrinking in a rhythm that belonged to no clock, only to the fire's own language of movement. Outside, the snow whispered across the land, but inside, all attention was turned inward, to the glow of flame and the weight of stone. Near the fire, a figure sat motionless. In their lap rested a rounded flake of flint, cool and smooth like frozen water. Their fingers, practiced by many seasons, held it gently, never forcing, never rushing. Nearby lay other stones, some long and narrow, some thick and heavy, each chosen not for color or beauty, but for the way they might break. These were not random rocks, but quiet promises, waiting to be shaped. A second stone, heavier, dark, and dense, was held in the other hand. It was not used to strike, but to speak. Slowly, with patient rhythm, the person brought the two stones together, not a blow, but a whisper, not a smash, but a tap measured, soft, exact. And from the flint, a tiny sliver broke away. It fell to the ground with a sound like dry snow brushing bark, a sound barely heard, but deeply known. The process was not quick. Hours would pass, and still the shape would remain half-formed. But this was the way of things. Carving stone was never about speed. It was about attention, about listening to what the stone wanted to become. One could not force a blade into being. One could only find it, hidden inside, like a memory waiting beneath the surface. Each tap was a question. Each flake that fell was an answer. In time, an edge began to emerge, not sharp like metal, but sharper. It gleamed slightly in the firelight, catching orange and gold reflections. The light danced along its edge like the shimmer of frost on ice. It was beautiful, but not decorative. This was a tool for survival, for cutting hides, scraping bark, or shaping bone. Yet in its making, it became something more, an offering to the silence, a meditation of movement. Sometimes another would sit nearby, also working. But no words passed between them. The fire spoke enough. Its pops and sighs filled the air with soft rhythm. The stones spoke, too, in tiny cracks, in the sound of flakes falling into a growing pile. This language had no need for voice. It was old, older than speech, older than stories. It was the language of creation, of hand and earth working together. The tools took on different forms. Some were long and curved like a crescent moon. Others were squat, made for grinding. A few were fine and pointed, thin as reeds. But each one was made the same way, with patience. A person could sit by the fire for a whole day, carving one blade, not because they had to, but because it felt right. The slow work matched the slow land. Nothing hurried, nothing loud. Around the fire, stones began to gather half-formed, waiting, some finished, some abandoned. Even the failures were not discarded with anger. They were simply part of the process, like fallen branches in a forest. A flint that cracked the wrong way was still useful in time. It might become a scraper or a sharp edge for another use. Nothing was wasted. The people of this land understood the value of each piece, not just in use, but in presence. Sometimes, when a tool was finished, it would be held up near the flame, not for approval, not for display, but simply to see how the light touched it. Firelight revealed the tool's surface, the smoothness of its back, the ridges from each flake removed, the faint line where the next break might have gone had the hand moved differently. In this soft inspection, there was no pride, only stillness. The tool was complete. That was enough. And still the fire burned. Its light glowed on the workers' cheeks, on their hands, on the cold stone that warmed slightly with use. Outside, the snow continued its silent drift. Inside, time moved differently. It pooled like melted snow in low places, stretching the moments into long, quiet flows. In this place, the act of making was also the act of resting. The mind slowed. The body settled. There was no need to finish quickly. The stone would wait. Even when the tool was done, the motion of carving often continued. Fingers traced the new edge. Hands smoothed the surface. Sometimes they carved tiny notches, not for beauty, but for grip. These, too, were done slowly, with thought. Each movement became part of the larger rhythm, part of the fire's song, part of the quiet. The youngest ones watched from the edge of the firelight. They did not speak. They learned through seeing, through hearing the gentle taps and soft breaks. Someday they would try their own hand. For now, they absorbed the stillness. In the future, their own fingers would carry these memories, not as instructions, but as instincts. There was no celebration when a blade was finished. No moment of applause or announcement. Instead, the person who made it would set it aside near others and perhaps begin again with a new stone. The work was never truly finished. It continued as long as the fire burned, as long as there were hands to hold and stones to shape. And so the evening passed. Stone met stone, again and again, with the gentleness of falling snow. Flakes gathered like tiny feathers at the maker's feet. The fire glowed lower, deeper, a red ember heart in the darkening world. Still, the people carved slowly, like time itself, quiet, enduring, patient. In the deep of night, when all tools were set aside and the last embers breathed their fading light, the shelter returned to silence. But in that silence, the stone tools remained testament to a way of being that valued quiet work, steady hands, and the magic of making something with care. At first light, when the pale breath of the morning mist still lingered in hollows and curled around the frozen branches, the day began not with loud labor, but with reverence. A quiet gathering of materials, a gentle study of form. Beneath the low arc of the sky, a pair of antlers glowed softly, caught in the hush of sunrise, their pale, polished curves seeming to hum with time. They did not belong to the living now, but neither were they discarded. They had become part of the work, a silent offering from the land, ready to be shaped with care. Bones and antlers were not just remnants. They were records. Smooth in places, porous in others. Each line, each texture, held the memory of motion, of life once lived. And now, in the hands of the early ones, they would become tools not born in fire like later metals, but awakened by attention and shaped through patience. These ancient materials were strong but willing, pliant but firm. They responded to touch, to rhythm, to the steady insistence of a thoughtful hand. The tools used to shape them were not grand, flint scrapers, stone chisels, abraders fashioned from rough rock. Each one had its place in the process. The scraping began softly, with the edge of a flake drawn carefully along the surface of bone. A whispering sound followed, delicate and steady, as thin curls of white flaked away, revealing the truer form beneath. It was not a violent act. It was more like uncovering, like remembering something already there. By the firelight's warmth or beneath the pale dome of daylight, the process continued. No part of the bone was wasted. Large fragments became handles, awls, and wedges. Smaller shards found purpose as needles or barbed tips. Even the splinters, fine and sharp, could be set aside for delicate tasks. Nothing was discarded without thought. To throw away a piece of bone was not just wasteful, it was unkind. These were not things taken for granted. They were honored, understood, and used with intention. The gnarled hands of the elders knew the weight of bone. They had shaped antler tines into tools so often that their fingers moved without command, only with memory. The younger ones, watching in silence, saw not just skill, but story. Every movement of the hand, every turn of the bone, was like a sentence in a language that had no written form, but could still be read by those who learned slowly, through presence. One piece of antler, smoothed and thick, was held in the lap of its maker. With quiet care, a groove was cut along its edge, using a thin flint blade. Not rushed, just patient, slow dragging. The sound of stone against antler echoed softly, tick, 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 like a metronome for the cold morning. Tiny flecks gathered in the folds of a hide cloth, laid beneath the work like pale snow. The groove grew deeper, the shape more defined, the hand steady, the breath calm. Sometimes, to soften the work, the bone was soaked in warm water, not boiling, just heated slowly, cradled in a bark bowl by the fire. After soaking, the material bent more willingly and could be worked into finer, curved tools. Bending bone was a delicate act. Too much force, and it would crack. Too little, and it would return to its rigid form. The early ones did not measure with tools, but with feel, with the resistance in the fingers, with the sound of stress in the material. The scraping of marrowless shafts was often done in silence, save for the rhythm of the blade. A repeated glide, never abrupt. Over time, the surface of the bone would become satin smooth, not polished to brilliance, but to usefulness. The kind of surface that would not catch on hide, would not splinter in the cold. Tools were shaped not just for form, but for feel, how they sat in the hand, how they slid against flesh or fiber, how they endured time. Needles were among the finest creations. Slivers of bone, long and narrow, sharpened slowly with stone dust and fingertip. Their eyes were not drilled, but rubbed open with patience, using a thin sinew thread drawn back and forth until a hole formed. No cracking, no splitting, just gentle wear. It might take a day, it might take 3, but the result was a tool that could mend clothing, bind wounds, stitch hides into tents. These small acts built shelter, warmth, survival. The hands that did this work did not rush. Even as the winds called through the trees and the shadows stretched across the snow, the hands continued, pressing, turning, refining. The light changed, but the rhythm remained. A tool nearly finished was often set aside for one last look the next morning. Sleep brought clarity. A new eye. No need to force the end. Around the working spaces, bits of antler and bone lay in quiet constellations. Not clutter, just fragments of intention. A piece set aside for a future day. Another too curved for this task, but perfect for another. The memory of each piece lingered long after it was touched. And when tools broke, they were mourned gently, and reshaped if they could be, returned to the cycle. This was not craft for beauty alone, though the results often were. It was craft for living, for binding the human hand to the materials of the land, for remembering that even in harshness there was gentleness, even in survival there could be quiet care. And always the bones remained beneath fur, beside flint, against skin. They carried the shape of ancient animals, and now they carried the shape of human thought, smooth, useful, trusted. Under the dimming sky, a newly shaped antler wedge caught the last of the sun and gleamed softly. It was not magic, but it was something close. A piece of the earth, made ready by ancient hands. The snow had fallen gently in the night, laying a soft hush across the land. It wasn't a storm, just a quiet dusting enough to blur the sharp lines of yesterday and make everything seem slower, gentler. As the pale light of morning stretched across the plain, it found the open steppe washed in silver. There was no horizon yet, only whiteness blending into sky. The air smelled clean, like untouched ice. And down upon the earth, impressed deep into the frozen crust, were tracks. Wide, deliberate, ancient tracks. They moved in a straight line, not chaotic or rushed, but measured, steady. Each one was round and enormous, each imprint deep enough to hold a sleeping child. Snow had gathered in their edges, but hadn't dared to fill them. Something about them held the wind still. These were the tracks of a mammoth. Perhaps several, perhaps a family, walking not in fear or haste, but in the slow rhythm of beasts that had known this land for ages. Each step was spaced like the slow beat of a distant drum. There was a cadence to the trail, a language beyond sound, etched into the frozen earth. Where the land tilted, the impressions tilted too. Where a small ridge rose, one print showed a slip, a slide, then correction. Maybe a younger mammoth adjusting its balance. Maybe an elder pressing more firmly into the snow. Nothing about it was frantic. It was all slow and vast and full of weight. Following these tracks was not an act of pursuit. It was a quiet communion. The humans who came behind the mammoths didn't rush. They moved with the same patience, as though being allowed to walk where giants had walked required a certain reverence. Their footfalls made barely a sound. Soft boots of hide pressed only lightly into the snow. They looked down often, sometimes bending, sometimes pausing, but never speaking. This place asked for silence, and silence was given. The sky above was pale blue, streaked with feathery clouds that drifted like slow herds. Below, the ground stretched flat and clean, broken only by tufts of frozen grass peeking through the snow. The tracks curved slightly with the lay of the land, following its natural rhythm. In the spaces between, shadows of morning slanted long and thin, reaching into the footprints and then crawling out again. The air was so still that the crunch of distant ice echoed faintly. A single bird's call, sharp and sudden, carried far before fading into the cold quiet. As they walked, the humans passed through patches of low mist curling along the ground. The moisture clung to fur and eyelashes, tiny beads of frost forming where breath met air. One man, older than the others, knelt beside the deepest track and reached out a hand. He didn't touch it. He simply hovered there for a moment, his fingers tracing the empty space above the impression. Then he drew back and stood again. It was not a moment of analysis, but of presence. The mammoth was gone, and yet still here. Here, Beneath an open sky and surrounded by no sound but wind, it was easy to imagine the creature. Its massive form swaying with each step, its tusks curved like moons, its breath rising in slow puffs, the vibrations of its walk lingering in the bones of the earth. There was no danger in this imagining, no drama, only the memory of a shared space. At the edge of one print, a small piece of ice glinted. When a traveler bent close, they saw that the ice had formed a thin curved sheet inside the footprint center. It reflected the pale light upward, catching the shape of the clouds above. It was like a lens, focusing not what was in front of it, but what had once been, a brief mirror for a vanished world. The humans moved on, past frozen ridges, past shallow snowdrifts, caught in the wind. Sometimes they stopped to trace a cracked pebble embedded in the track's edge, or to look toward the north, where the line of prints led, always steady, always forward. They did not follow with intent to catch or conquer. They followed to remember, to stay near the echoes. One child, bundled tightly in furs, walked with short, careful steps beside the others. Her breath made soft clouds, and she looked often at the prints, her eyes wide but not afraid. She was learning not from stories, but from the land itself. No one had to speak to teach her. The footprints taught everything worth knowing. As midday came and went, the light shifted, turning colder, more blue. The shadows grew softer. The tracks began to fade slowly, not from snow, but from time. The last few impressions were shallower, half filled by the drifting wind. And then, after one long, wide print that tilted slightly to the east, there were no more. The trail stopped not abruptly, but as if it had chosen to end here. Beyond it stretched the same blank landscape, untouched and wide. No new marks, no sound. Just open quiet. The people stood there a while, looking at nothing. And in that nothing, they felt everything. The presence of the beasts, the cold breath of the steppe, the whisper of history underfoot. The trail was gone, but it had left its imprint behind, not just in the ground, but in them. In their slow steps and silent watching. In their breath and stillness. There were no words spoken. None were needed. They turned eventually, not out of boredom or urgency, but because that was the way of things. What had passed, and what remained was the echo of that passing, the memory of a presence that had touched the land gently, even with all its weight. And as the humans walked away, their own footprints were laid down, not as wide, not as deep, but still there, still part of the same story. Two sets of tracks, separated by time, side by side for a moment in snow that remembered everything. The cold had arrived not as a storm, but as a whisper, a slow hush that spread across the land and quieted every corner. Overnight, the ground had turned white, covered in a gentle layer of snow that softened every shape and stilled every sound. The branches, now bowed slightly under the weight of cold dust, trembled only when touched by the occasional breeze. Even the smoke from the old fire drifted lazily upward, thick and slow, as if reluctant to leave the comfort of Earth Dot within a low shelter of curved wood and hide, nestled among the trees at the edge of a wide and sleeping plain. The silence was deeper still. Thin layers of snow clung to the outer seams of the structure. The fire in the center had burned low, leaving behind only a quiet shimmer of coals. Red embers glowed faintly beneath a gray covering of ash, giving off a warmth that seemed more memory than heat dot near the hearth. A few tools lay undisturbed. Bits of flint, smooth antler, sinew cord, arranged not with precision, but with the simple order of repetition. They had been used often, and their shapes reflected the memory of hands. Snowflakes drifted in through a narrow seam in the roof, falling softly onto the scattered tools. On one dark stone, a single flake landed and began to melt, leaving behind a perfect, temporary mark, like a breath on glass dot The man within the shelter did not move quickly. His breath rose and fell in a steady rhythm, visible in the cold. His fingers, wrapped in fur and hardened by years of quiet labor, moved with the same rhythm, not to chase time, but to follow it gently. Before him, a blade lay unfinished, carved from flint so dark it almost shimmered in the dim light. Snow had settled on its surface, veiling its jagged edges beneath a powder of white. He picked up a strip of tanned hide and slowly wiped the flint. The snow gave way beneath his touch, revealing the sharp ridges and fractured lines that waited underneath. There was no rush, no urgency, only the quiet return of a form that had been resting. Each movement was like turning a page in a book that had no end, not to find a conclusion, but to spend time in the unfolding. Outside, snow fell more steadily now. The trees were slowly disappearing behind a white curtain. Their outlines faded into soft shapes, indistinct and peaceful. The world beyond the shelter had lost its color, replaced by quiet shades of gray and white. Even the footprints from the morning had been buried. There was no sound but snow, and even that did not fall with noise, only with presence. The man leaned forward and turned the flint in his hand, studying the light that caught in the tiny fractures. It was not ready. The stone still held roughness, points of resistance, but it was closer. His other hand reached for the pressure flaker, the handle made of antler, worn smooth in places. He held it with a quiet familiarity, the kind that comes only with time. But he did not press it to the stone just yet. Instead, he paused. A moment passed, then another. Snow fell. The ember pit glowed faintly. The smell of smoke lingered just above the floor, where warmth still clung. He closed his eyes briefly, not in rest, but in listening. Not to sound, but to rhythm. The rhythm of a winter day where nothing rushed, nothing demanded, and even the tools waited with patience. Then gently he began. The antler point touched. The flint with precision, not force. A tiny flake broke away and fell to the ground. It landed soundlessly on a layer of hide, already dusted with earlier work. He shifted slightly, adjusted his grip, and pressed again. Another flake. Another fragment removed, not taken, but revealed. The stone responded not to pressure, but to care, and the man offered that care without expectation. Every so often, he would stop and blow across the flint's surface, clearing away the smallest bits of dust. His breath formed a cloud in the cold air before disappearing into the stillness. Then he would continue. A movement here, a pause, a shift, another careful flake. The work was not slow out of necessity. It was slow because slowness was part of the craft. A hurried hand made broken edges. A quiet hand made shape. Beyond the trees, a bird called out once, distant, soft, perhaps wondering where the forest had gone beneath all the snow. The sound faded quickly, muffled by the deepening layers of white. No footsteps followed. The bird was alone in its call, and the world remained unchanged in its silence. Inside, the man paused again. He examined the blade, now lighter a long one. Sighed, more balanced in the hand. The tip was forming, not sharp yet, but purposeful. He rested it gently on the hide beside him and reached for a smaller tool, one used for smoothing rather than shaping. Its surface was cold to the touch. He warmed it briefly in his palm before setting it to work, tracing the edges of the flint. With a whisper of contact, snow had begun to collect in the corners of the shelter, not thickly, but as a quiet visitor, respectful and unhurried. The man did not sweep it away. Instead, he let it be, part of the landscape that had entered his work. One flake landed on his sleeve and did not melt. It sat there, crystal and still, a tiny mirror of the world outside. The blade would not be finished today, but it had changed. It had moved forward, gently, alongside the day. And that was enough. He gathered the tools slowly, brushing snow from each one before placing it back into the hide roll. The pressure flaker last, still warm from his grip. He leaned back, the work done for now. Outside, the sky was turning to dusk, not with color, but with depth. Shadows deepened in the snow, and the world grew softer still. The silence thickened. Inside, the flint blade waited beside the hearth, and the snow continued to fall, not loudly, not quickly, but endlessly. They had been walking for hours, not with urgency and not with direction, but with the simple rhythm of footsteps in snow. The air was dry and still, each breath a slow curl of mist that lingered and faded behind them. The sky above was dark, but not black tinged with a soft navy hue that promised something just beyond the horizon. The plain stretched ahead, empty yet somehow full, as if holding its breath. Snow crunched quietly beneath their feet, each step leaving a soft impression that glowed faintly in the moonlight. The group moved without speaking, close but not touching, drawn forward not by any particular goal, but by the quiet pulse of the world around them. There was something waiting in the sky tonight, something they all felt but could not name. The stars had begun to fade, not from clouds, but from something. Brighter, deeper. At first, it was just a faint shimmer near the edge of the sky, a hint of green that flickered and withdrew, uncertain. Then slowly, as if remembering itself, the Aurora rose dot, it began with a thin ribbon of pale light dancing just above the horizon. The group stopped without needing to speak. One by one, they lowered their gear to the ground and stood still, their eyes lifting upward. The light grew stronger, shifting from green to violet, curling into soft shapes that seemed to breathe and sigh. There was no sound, but something about its movement felt musical, like a slow melody played by the wind itself. The snow around them reflected the changing sky, taking on a subtle glow. Each mound and ridge gained a second life in soft color. The fire was built slowly, not to warm their hands, but to give the moment shape. A few small sticks, a spark, a hush of smoke rising into the cold. It burned low, its flame orange and steady, offering a small circle of light amid the vast silence. They sat close, knees drawn in, hands wrapped in fur. No one spoke. There was nothing to say that the sky had not already said better. Above them, the aurora unfolded. Green stretched into blue. Blue slipped into purple. The edges of the light curled like the tips of waves or the breath of clouds. It moved not with speed, but with certainty. Every shift was measured, like a slow dancer. Tracing steps in the sky, eyes watched without blinking. Some tilted their heads, as if to follow the flow of color more easily. Others simply stared upward, unmoving, as if afraid to miss a single motion. The flame cracked quietly, and once a piece of wood fell inward with a soft sigh. The snow around them glittered faintly, catching both the fire and the sky far in the distance. An owl called once. Its voice echoed across the plain, not intruding but joining the stillness. Then silence again. The wind did not rise. The cold did not deepen. Time passed, but it passed gently. No one moved to add wood to the fire. It was enough as it was. A few glowing embers, a flicker of warmth. Most of the warmth came from the presence of one another, the shared stillness, the shared gaze. One pair of hands rested on bent knees. Another touched the soft rim of a fur hood. One figure leaned back slightly, letting the snow catch against their shoulders without brushing it away. The aurora twisted again, now forming a loose spiral. It drifted from one side of the sky to the other, as if searching for a place to rest. Its colors deepened in some places, faded in others. No pattern, yet not without purpose. The watchers below did not seek to understand. They only followed Dot. It felt like a story being told, though there were no words. A story written in light and space and cold, carried on air. Perhaps it had always been told. Perhaps others before them had sat just like this, on this same patch of earth, and watched the same dance. Perhaps the lights themselves remembered. One hand reached out slowly toward the sky, not to grasp, but to greet. The light did not answer, but it seemed to soften. As if acknowledging the gesture dots somewhere behind them, a fox moved silently between trees. Its steps left a narrow trail in the snow, but no sound. It paused once, looked up at the sky, and then continued on. Even the animals tonight seemed quieter, more aware. The fire had burned low now. Only the occasional crack reminded them it was still alive. No one rose to tend it. They were warm enough. The cold no longer felt like something to resist. It was simply part of the moment, as much as the snow and the sky. One of them lay back in the snow, arms at their sides, eyes fixed. Upward. Another followed, then another. Soon they were all lying beneath the lights, as if to be closer, as if to let the sky rest gently upon them. From this position, the world felt both larger and smaller. The lights seemed more immense, and yet more personal, like they were meant just for this group, just for this night. The snow beneath them cradled their bodies gently. The sky above moved with slow care. The aurora began to fade, not all at once, but gradually. The green dimmed first, then the violet. The ribbons narrowed, then stretched thin, like threads being pulled back into the fabric of the night. Number 1 moved. They watched it go without regret. The beauty had been enough. The memory would stay. When the last curl of light disappeared into darkness, they remained still. The fire offered its final glow. The stars had returned, scattered across. The sky, calm and unblinking. The snow continued to fall in tiny flakes, as if covering the earth in quiet again. Eventually, one by one, they rose, slowly, with care. They did not speak. The embers were left behind. The snow would cover them soon. Their tracks would fade. The moment would pass. But the lights, they had followed them, and for a while the world had felt like a dream. They reached the mouth of the cave as the sky dimmed to a muted silver. Snow clung to their shoulders, their hoods, their backs, but no one brushed it away. The world outside remained still. Only the faint hush of wind over the frozen plain could be heard, like breath against distant stone. The entrance was low and narrow, partially hidden by frost-covered shrubs, but it had the quiet pull of an old memory. One by one, they ducked beneath the stone archway, stepping into shadow. The cold changed immediately, not colder but older. The air inside was damp and still, and it carried a scent of time that had no name, the scent of water that had never known sunlight, of stone that had never warmed, of moments buried deeper. Then silence their footsteps slowed. Every movement became gentler. The stone beneath them was smooth in places, rough in others, but always cold. Each step made only the faintest sound, and that sound seemed to disappear before it could echo. The deeper they walked, the more the outside world faded. Light dwindled behind them, swallowed by the curve of the cave's throat. Ahead, faint. Reflections flickered on wet stone, not from fire, but from the dim blue of minerals hidden in the walls, glowing with a pale shimmer that seemed to breathe. Water dripped from the ceiling. Not constantly, just a single drop now and then. It fell into a shallow pool, then another drop from another place. The rhythm was slow, uneven, timeless, like the cave itself was thinking. The walls rose high around them now, and the air grew. Thicker. They didn't speak. There was no need. Their breaths came soft and slow. One reached out and ran gloved fingers along the stone, pausing where the surface dipped into the faint curve of a handprint. A mark left long ago, pressed with quiet purpose. The handprint was small, older than memory, smoothed by air and time, but still distinct. Others followed, some high, some low, scattered across the stone like whispers. Not arranged in lines or patterns, just placed each one its own soft sentence. They stood and looked, then stepped back, then moved on further into the cave. The air turned cooler again, and the walls tightened around them. The sound of dripping. Water grew slightly louder, like distant footsteps walking in reverse. In one hollow, the walls arched upward like the ribs of a sleeping creature. Here, the sound of the wind returned, not from outside, but from narrow gaps in the stone, where air slipped through unseen. It carried no chill, only memory. It brushed their cheeks and moved their hair gently, as if reminding them to listen. Cave floor sloped downward. They followed it without hurry. Their lantern, a small, oil-fed bowl, cast a steady golden glow that flickered softly on the ceiling. Shadows swayed like long-forgotten gestures, stretching and folding without sound. Turned and looked behind. Their footprints remained, but just barely. The damp stone drank them slowly, erasing presence with patience. Nothing in the cave resisted time. Nothing tried to remain. It all moved forward by standing still. They came to a chamber where the walls opened wide, and the ceiling vanished into darkness. A pool rested in the center, silent, still, and perfect. It did not ripple. It did not reflect. It simply was. They stood along its edge, not stepping too close, not breaking its stillness. Each saw something different in the depth stone, shadow, a faint gleam, or nothing at all. The dripping water here made no sound. It must have fallen somewhere deeper, beyond the reach of ear or eye. In this place, only breath and thought remained. One figure crouched near the wall, tracing a faint carving with quiet hands. It was not deep, a set of parallel lines, curving and crossing. Not a symbol, not a message, just a shape. It reminded them of wind in tall grass, of ripples on snow, of time moving softly across the face of stone. They lingered in that room for a long while, or maybe only moments. In the cave, time was not a thing that passed, but a thing that gathered. Like mist, like silence, like the slow return of memory from somewhere deeper than thought. When they rose and moved on, the footsteps they left were already beginning to blur. The passage narrowed again, guiding them through a corridor where the ceiling dipped so low they had to bow their heads. The stone brushed against their backs like the touch of old trees, or the curve of ancient bone. They paused once more where the air felt warm for a moment, like breath had passed recently. But it was only the memory of warmth, stored in stone. Then, ahead, a slow, faint stirring of air. They followed it. The passage widened again. Another chamber. Not large, not bright, but open. And there, on the far wall, another series of marks, hands again, but larger, deeper. One beside the other, spaced with intention. A single line drawn beneath them. A border. A gesture. Perhaps a name. Perhaps a farewell. They stood before the marks in silence. Then each in turn placed their own hand near the ancient one's. Not touching, just near. The stone did not answer, but it remembered. When they turned to leave, the sound of their own breath felt different, calmer. The air behind them grew still. Again, like a page turned and set aside. The journey back was slower, not because the path was harder, but because the weight of silence had grown gentler. The dripping water behind them now seemed farther away, like a story fading with the end of a dream. As they stepped into the cold air once more, the snow had begun to fall again. Not heavy, just soft, steady flakes. The world outside waited as it always had quiet, wide, unchanged. It looked back once at the cave's mouth, not with longing, not with fear, just quiet understanding. The cave held stories older than words, and tonight, for a little while, it had let them listen. The snow continued to fall, covering their footsteps almost as quickly as they were made, leaving only stillness behind. Night settled gently over the frozen plain, not as a blanket, but more like a breath slowly exhaled by the earth itself. The light faded from a pale blue to a deeper shade of smoke gray, and in a quiet hollow between two low stone ridges, a group of figures gathered. The wind had stilled for the moment, and a thin frost clung to the grasses, their tips sparkling faintly in the dusk. The snow around them was lightly disturbed by footprints, then smoothed again by silence. They moved without urgency. Dried grass was piled softly in the center, circled by small, round stones that had long since blackened from many fires before. The hands that worked were familiar with each motion. There was no discussion, no gestures of command, only a shared understanding. A thin stick was taken, a flint struck against stone, and after a few bright sparks and a whiff of char, the grass gave a soft hiss and caught flame. A curl of smoke rose lazily, turning in the air like a spirit waking from sleep. The fire did not leap up with drama, but unfurled gently, an orange glow licking slowly along the edges of wood and bark. They fed it bit by bit, coaxing it into a steady warmth. The flames moved quietly, casting flickering gold onto the curved rocks and worn tools resting nearby. With the fire breathing low and calm, they began preparing the evening meal, though. It was not a meal in the way one might expect, no feast, no hurry, no chatter. Only the quiet ritual of nourishment shared without words. From a woven pouch, one brought out a clay pot. Its surface was uneven but well used, its reddish-brown color dulled from many touches and much time spent near heat. The shape was simple, round and squat, like a cupped hand. It had no patterns, no markings, only the faint impressions left behind by fingers long ago. They placed the pot onto a flat stone near the fire, where the heat would creep toward it rather than strike all at once. Pouch of water was opened and poured gently into the vessel. The clay accepted the cool liquid without complaint. Next came a bundle of dried roots, sliced thin and smelling faintly of earth and spice. Some were light and fibrous, others darker and denser. They sank slowly into the water. A few leaves gathered from before the snows came, or added in, along with a pinch of salt ground from old riverbed stones. Each addition made a small sound, the tap of a root, the soft splash of water, the hush of dry leaves settling into warmth. As the pot absorbed the heat, its sides began to darken slightly. Small bubbles appeared, first at the edges, then rising slowly from the center. The roots began to move gently, shifting with the rhythm of the warming water. Steam drifted up, thin and white, catching the firelight in quiet swirls. The smell was not strong, but it was comforting, earthy, clean and deep. They watched in silence. No one stirred the pot just yet. It wasn't time. Instead, they sat cross-legged around the fire, the light painting soft curves across their faces and furs. Shadows danced behind them, not quick or wild, but slow, like echoes remembering how to move. One reached for a stick and gently pushed a coal closer to the pot, not speaking, not breaking the moment's stillness. Time passed without measure. They didn't speak. The only sounds were the soft simmering of the pot and the occasional pop from the fire. They breathed in the warmth, letting it reach their fingers and toes, feeling it melt into skin stiffened by snow. One leaned forward, cradling the pot with cloth-wrapped hands and giving the contents a single slow stir. The liquid shifted, the roots turned lazily, and the leaves sighed. They did not rush to serve it. The fire still had more to give. They passed the pot between them, each holding it in their hands for a few moments, not to drink, not yet, but to feel its warmth. The clay radiated soft heat, gentle and familiar. Their eyes did not need to meet. The pot, the fire, and the hush between them said everything that needed to be said. When it came time to eat, they used hollowed shells and flat stones. No spoons, no bowls, only what the earth had offered. Each took a small portion, blowing gently before sipping. The broth was not rich, but it was kind. The roots had softened, the leaves had dissolved into flavor, and the salt lingered on the tongue like memory. It was warmth more than taste something to hold them close through the long dark. They took turns, no order required. The shells passed from hand to hand. The pot never left the circle. The fire burned low now, more ember than flame, glowing. Red beneath the pot like a slow heartbeat. No one rushed to finish. Each sip was a pause, each breath an invitation to stay in that moment just a little longer. When the pot was nearly empty, one tilted it slowly and let the last of the broth pour onto a stone, an offering to the cold earth, or perhaps just a gesture of closure. They set the pot near the fire once more, upside down now, so the steam could drift upward freely. No one spoke. There was nothing to say. Their hands were warm. Their stomachs were full. The fire's glow settled into a deeper red, like the last traces of sunset behind the hills. Outside their circle, the wind had returned, but only softly. It touched the snow with a sigh, brushed against the rocks like a lullaby too old to remember. The stars above blinked into view, distant and cold, but no longer alone. The world was asleep now, except for them and the clay pot and the fire. They lay back one by one, wrapped in fur, their breaths slowing. The coals still pulsed quietly, holding the last of the warmth. And beside them, the clay pot rested on its side empty, glowing faintly and still warm. The morning opened with a pale, gauzy light stretching thinly across the horizon, a quiet signal that the long night was retreating once again. The tundra, vast and hushed, held on to its breath as the sun peeked through clouds in a hesitant glow. The earth was still, yet alive beneath the snowy crust. Roots slumbered, and above it, a soft wind stirred fine particles of frost. Far in the distance, the outline of low hills melted gently into the whiteness, blurring where ground met sky. A group moved slowly across the snow-covered ground, their fur-lined feet pressing into the crusted surface, leaving behind a quiet trail of shallow impressions. The sound was nearly nothing, just a faint whisper of hide-brushing snow, the occasional gentle creak of a tightened leather strap. One figure paused, lifting a gloved hand to shield their eyes from the low sun. The light bounced softly from icy drifts, creating halos that danced along the curves of the landscape. Overhead, a scattered flock of birds passed in silence, their V formations slicing across the open sky with deliberate grace. Their wings beat in unison, a rhythm too soft to hear, but present all the same. Each step across the frozen moss brought with it a sense of stillness and distance, as though the land itself were listening. The tundra offered no speech, only the quiet encouragement of space endless, windswept and open like a breath drawn. Slowly, everywhere around them, the earth lay wrapped in silence. Lichen, curled and frozen, clung stubbornly to rocks that had not shifted in seasons. A patch of reindeer moss peeked from beneath a rise, barely touched by the sun's reach. In places, stones jutted through the snow like old memories, smooth, weathered, indifferent to time. Their colors muted, almost washed in the pale glow of a distant sun-dot as the travelers moved. So did their shadows, long and soft, brushing against patches of frost like whispers. The cold did not bite, but hovered gently, brushing their cheeks. and eyelashes with a soft numbness. Their breath trailed behind them in delicate wisps, momentarily visible before fading into the greater stillness. Each breath slowed, matching the rhythm of the land. No urgency, no destination, only the experience of walking. Somewhere nearby, a small stream remained unfrozen beneath a curtain of snow, its gurgling hidden from sight, but faintly heard if one stopped to listen. Occasionally, the ice crust cracked faintly underfoot, a small reminder of movement beneath stillness. The snow, untouched except for their trail, stretched like parchment waiting to be read. No tracks of animals today. No sign of struggle. Just the presence of a few quiet beings making their way across something older than memory. The wind picked up slightly, stirring a song through frozen grasses bent beneath frost. It sang not with force, but with patience, moving low and slow, carrying the scent of something far away. Pine resin, perhaps, or cold water resting beneath a rock. It passed over their shoulders like an old companion, neither unwelcome nor intrusive, just present. The grasses trembled in response, a soft rustling too faint to record, yet deeply felt. One figure bent down to touch a patch of frozen moss, brushing away a thin layer of snow. Beneath it, a subtle green peeked through alive, barely, a quiet assertion against the weight of winter. No words were spoken, for none were needed. Each movement held purpose. Each glance was enough to communicate understanding. Together, they continued forward, their rhythm unhurried, each step a meditation on the moment beneath their feet. The sun had risen slightly now, a soft disk behind gauze clouds. Its rays did not warm, but painted the snow in pale golds and silvers, creating the illusion of warmth where none could be found. Along the edge of a rise, a single tree stood, bent by years of wind, its trunk twisted but strong. It cast a fragile shadow on the snow, long, delicate, like a brushstroke. They passed it slowly, offering no change in pace, but feeling its presence like a marker in time. A small cluster of rocks offered a place to pause. They sat, not to rest their bodies, but to let their minds rest in the openness. No fire was built, no meal was shared, just silence and breath, and the sense of being held by a world that neither demanded nor offered, only existed. Their eyes wandered the sky, watching the clouds drift in slow procession, distant and unreachable. Time passed unnoticed. A bird called once, a brief chirp lost in the wind. Somewhere far ahead, the snow broke into ridges, wine-sculpted waves. Frozen in time, they stood again and resumed their quiet journey, letting the tundra guide them rather than any map. Each step brought no closer goal, only further immersion into the moment. The world was not large or small, only continuous. Without sharp edges, they passed a frozen pond, the surface a mirror of dull blue and clouded white. It reflected their figures with distortion, as if the land itself were unsure of what it saw. Nearby, a feather lay trapped in the snow, small, dark, and perfectly still. One of them knelt to observe it, but did not touch. It was not a thing to be taken, only acknowledged, a reminder that even here, life had passed through. As the sky began to turn pale pink, a day moved gently toward its quiet end. The light dimmed, not in urgency, but in grace. Their steps slowed not from fatigue, but from reverence. The ground was still cold, the wind still steady, but something in the air shifted an invitation to stop, to linger, to let go. One by one, they paused and turned to look back across the trail they had left. It was nothing more than a line of shallow footprints across a stretch of white, soon to be dusted over by falling snow or lost to drifting winds. Yet it had been. Their soft marks of passage through an ancient world. The tundra, unchanged, accepted their presence and now watched them go. They moved on, deeper into the land's embrace, under a sky slowly blooming with stars. Nothing needed to be said. The snow beneath their feet was soft now, the world dimming in the gentlest way. They would find a place to stop soon. But for now, they walked quiet, steady, and completely at peace. There was no need for words in the dim afternoon light. The figures sat together, wrapped in fur and quiet, beneath a pale sky that hung motionless above them. Around them, the tundra stretched wide and white, but here just in this small hollow. Of earth and stone, there was warmth, not of heat, but of presence. Tools lay carefully placed on a spread of hide, and in each hand was a rhythm waiting to be remembered. A man lifted a piece of flint, its edge gleaming faintly with the memory of ancient pressure. He turned it slowly, studying the angles, then brought it gently against a length of bone. The first tap was soft, a simple testing note, like the beginning of a song. The second was more certain, a muted click that echoed briefly in the stillness. Tap, pause, tap. The pattern began, not rushed, not loud, just steady, like a pulse remembered. Across from him, a woman traced her fingers along the edge of a blade, smoothing it with quiet care. Her movements were circular, deliberate, and smooth, like the turning of a wheel that had no beginning or end. Each pass of her hand along the stone sent a tiny shower of dust to the ground, hardly seen, hardly heard. But together, these actions formed the day's rhythm, a lullaby made from touch, and stone, and time. The air held a softness to it, as if muffled by snow. Even the wind seemed to hush as it passed overhead. In this moment, creation did not come with fire or noise, but with the steady repetition of work done countless times before. Flint struck bone. Bone gave way, slowly. The tools were not forced. They were revealed little by little, as though coaxed gently from within. No voices broke the rhythm. There was no reason for them. The people moved like dancers who had long since memorized the steps. A child watched nearby, not asking questions, only observing. The scraping of hide with stone made a soothing rasp, like a breath being drawn in and let out again. The ground beneath them was firm, dusted with frost, and the sky above held soft, gray-blue light like the inside of a shell. One woman leaned forward, blowing gently across the edge of a carved scraper. Tiny flecks of powder lifted and vanished into the stillness. She smiled slightly, not at anything in particular, just in quiet recognition of the moment. Her hands moved with ease, with a grace that came not from speed, but from understanding. The tool was nearly done, its form emerging like a familiar shape returning from sleep. Another man bent over a piece of antler, smoothing its edge with a narrow shard of flint. His hands, large and worn, moved with the tenderness of memory. Every motion seemed connected to something older, a knowledge passed down not in words but in action. There was music in the way the materials responded, a soft "if," a muted click, the whisper of stone on horn. It was not music to dance to, but to breathe with. The space around them was filled with the quiet song of making. No one hurried. Time was wide and slow, like the open land that held them. Shadows drifted slowly across the snow, marking the passage of the sun above clouds that never quite cleared. Even the smoke from a nearby fire moved lazily, curling upward in silver threads before dissolving into the afternoon air. Hands passed tools between them now and then gently, with no interruption. A stone point was tested against a strip of hide. A needle carved from bone was held up to the light. Nothing was wasted, nothing rushed. Each piece had its moment, and each person, in turn, became part of the rhythm, contributing not just movement, but presence, being part of the quiet choreography of the day. The light shifted slowly. The sky darkened slightly at the edges, though no one seemed to notice. They kept working, their gestures like a soft echo of the land's patience. A boy tried to mimic the striking of Flint, his movements clumsy but careful. A nearby elder adjusted his grip without speaking. The rhythm continued. Tap, scrape, blow, turn, tap again. The music of the day continued without pause, a soft bird. Call came from somewhere above, almost out of place in the stillness. For a moment, the group paused not because they were startled, but simply to let the sound enter them. Then the work resumed, as natural as breathing. Their fingers had their own memory. They did not need to think about where to hold, when to strike, how to smooth. They simply did as others had done before them. Bone tools lay finished now, resting in rows like sleeping animals. Their edges were fine, their shapes elegant in their simplicity. No two were exactly alike, yet all were useful, beautiful in the quiet way of things made to last. They would be used for cutting, scraping, shaping, maybe even as gifts. But now they rested, warm from the touch of human hands. The last rays of sunlight peeked through the clouds, casting a long golden hue across the ground. It touched the tools, the faces, the fur-lined shoulders of the people gathered there. It brought no heat, only light, but that was enough. They sat back for a moment, letting the silence grow deeper. No one spoke. The work had ended, but the rhythm lingered in the air, in the tools, in the gentle memory of movement. That evening would come soon, and with it, rest. The tools would be carried back, the fire would be tended, food would be shared. But in this pocket of time, nothing more was needed. The rhythm of flint and bone had played out its slow, soft song. It had spoken not with words, but with motion, touch, and care. The tundra had listened, as it always did, offering its silence. As a steady backdrop dot, the people rose quietly, stretching their limbs, brushing bits of dust from their hands and clothing. The day was ending, but it had not passed. It had been lived slowly and attentively, with stone and bone, with breath and stillness. As they walked away, the snow covered their footprints lightly, and the place where they had worked returned to stillness. But the rhythm remained in memory, in hands, in the air. In the soft hush of twilight, when the last threads of light folded behind the distant ridgelines, the stone walls inside the cave began to glow faintly. Not from the fading sun, but from the flicker of firelight. The flames did not roar. They swayed gently, casting warm waves across the uneven surfaces. Every crack and crevice seemed to breathe as the shadows danced, slow and rhythmic, like a memory of movement lost in time. The cave was cool, still holding the breath of the ancient earth. The air smelled of ash and stone dust, and something deeper, perhaps the scent of quiet intentions, left behind by those who came long before. Someone had kindled the fire with care, not to cook, not for warmth, but to illuminate. To remember dot around the hearth, the walls curved inward like the embrace of a giant palm. Here, among the rocks, were stories that could not be spoken aloud. The stories were drawn in lines of red ochre, charcoal black, and soft traces of yellow clay. Each figure seemed caught mid-motion, deer in mid-leap, bears standing still as trees, birds hovering with wings that curved like breath. The red came from crushed iron-rich earth, mixed with a bit of water or fat. The black came from burned wood, gently ground into fine dust. These were not accidents. They were choices, made by hands that understood what it meant to leave something behind, not to be seen once, but to remain for lifetimes. One shape looked like a bison, but not quite. Real. Its horns curved higher, almost like clouds. Another was a long-tailed creature walking upright, painted with 4 arms and eyes too large. These weren't just animals. They were dreams pressed into stone visions, not of what was, but what was imagined, or feared, or honored. Beneath them, a human figure sat with arms stretched upward. Was it a plea? A dance? A song only the fire could hear? As the flames flickered, the drawings appeared to shift. The bison seemed to nod its head. The bird's wings fluttered. The hunter's arm moved slowly, as if drawing back a bow that no longer existed. Firelight did not merely illuminate. It awakened. It gave motion to the stillness, breath to the stone. A pair of eyes watched, calm and unblinking. The watcher did not speak. There was no need to. In this place, words could only disturb the silence that held so much. The gaze moved gently across the wall, from one figure to the next, pausing at a cluster of symbols no larger than a hand. Spirals, dots, a wave that looked like wind carved into stone. Perhaps they were maps, or songs, or simply the need to make a mark and say, "I was here." Behind the viewer, the fire cracked softly. A twig settled into the embers. A small puff of ash rose like breath into the air. The rhythm of the flames was steady, not like speech, not like footsteps, more like a lullaby remembered from before words began. Each crackle echoed faintly, then faded into the deep hush that filled every crevice of the cave. To the side, a piece of red ochre rested on a flat rock, its edges worn down from use. It was shaped like a thick pebble, with tiny traces of oil still clinging to its surface. Nearby, a thin stick of charcoal, smooth as a finger bone, had rolled a little from where it had once been held. The tools were simple, but they carried meaning deeper than their shape. Each line drawn was a choice. Each mark made was a moment caught. Outside the cave, the wind sighed softly through the grasses, but its voice did not reach this deep. In here, only the fire spoke. It whispered across the walls, letting the painted creatures come to life in their own quiet way. Farther into the stone room, other drawings lined the walls, fainter with time. Some had faded nearly to dust, the pigment worn thin by moisture or time. But even those whispers remained, ghosts of images that still held shape if the light caught them just so. A cluster of hands, smaller than any grown person's, pressed side by side along one curve of the wall. Their fingers were splayed, as if waving hello or goodbye. These were not the handprints of artists. They were the shadows of presence, small reminders of touch. Perhaps they belonged to children, or perhaps the hands were painted small too. Remember a time when things were softer, newer, and the world was something to reach for. The figure watching the wall breathed slowly, their eyes tracing the shapes. The breath was not deep or hurried. It was even, like the sound of wind across a still pond. In that quiet, the images seemed to settle again, falling back into stillness. At the edge of the fire's light, the stone returned to gray. The warmth no longer reached that far. In that cooler shade, the cave held its older self silent, still and untouched. There was no rush to leave. Time had folded itself around this place. The hours did not press forward. The silence was not empty. It was full of meaning, of moments, of stories that did not need to be told aloud to be known. Slowly, the fire dimmed. The tallest flame bowed gently, then sank into a bed of glowing ash. The shadows lengthened across the cave floor, crawling up the walls like quiet waves, and still the images remained, painted in earth, lit by flame, wrapped in silence. Somewhere above, on the surface, the night sky turned slowly. Stars wheeled overhead like glowing embers scattered from the hearth of the heavens. But inside, nothing moved but the last soft breath of fire and the memory of hands that once traced trees across stone. This was not a place of endings, nor of beginnings. It was a space between day and night, between silence and story, between breath and memory. Here, in this hush, painted stones and dreaming fires would keep their quiet vigil long after the watcher left. long after the flames cooled, long after the last footstep faded, and still the walls would remember. In the hush between autumn's parting breath and winter's arrival, there was a stillness so complete it seemed as though time itself had curled inward to rest. The forest did not speak. Its branches, once filled with chatter and rustling life, now held only the soft weight of silence. The golden leaves, which had once danced freely in the wind, now drifted in slow spirals, falling without urgency, as if placing themselves gently upon the earth. They settled one by one onto the mossy floor, forming quiet blankets of faded amber, ochre, and soft brown. There was no wind now, only the subtle hush of the world turning inward. Even the air was thick with pause, as though it had forgotten to move. It clung to bark and stone and skin with a kind of gentle waiting, beneath the last of the yellowing. Trees' small pools had formed, mirror still, where melting frost had kissed the forest floor at dawn. In them, the sky reflected back without ripple clouds drifting overhead in silence, white and soft against the pale blue. A single drop of water fell from the tip of a low branch, disturbed by no hand. It landed in the pool with a soft plip, sending a ripple outward, delicate and brief dot no birds called. Their voices had thinned with the cooling light. What once echoed between trunks, the crisp notes of songbirds or the rustle of wings, was now replaced with a more tender quiet. The hush of feathers drawn tight, the stillness of nests tucked against branches, cradled and waiting. The snow had not yet fallen fully, but hints of its presence lingered in shaded hollows. Pale patches remained where the sun could not reach, caught in the creases of rocks or the folds of fallen logs. They melted slowly, seeping into the earth grain by grain. As the snow turned to water, it made a quiet music drops, tapping softly against leaves, slipping down stones, whispering into roots. It was not silence in its truest sense, but something softer, a stillness that breathed. Every sound was a hush, every motion a gentle yielding. A squirrel had paused mid-step on a high branch, tail curled tight to its body. It did not scurry or leap, only blinked slowly at the world around it. Below, a rabbit sat nestled at the base of a tree, its ears upright but unmoving. It did not nibble or twitch, only listened, not to any sound in particular, but to the absence of urgency. Even the river, once full and quick, had slowed. Its surface shimmered with a glassy sheen. In the shallows, the pebbles beneath were visible round and smooth, worn by time and the patient passage of water. A thin skin of ice had begun to form along the edges, not thick enough to hold weight, but enough to capture light and turn it into shimmer. From time to time, a small crack echoed just one, a fracture in the new ice, delicate and sharp, like the soft clink of flint against flint. It did not repeat. The sound simply came, then faded, leaving the air more hushed than before. High above, the sky was pale and endless, not heavy with snow yet, but stretched thin by the cold. The sun did not shine so much as it glowed diffused through a layer of thin clouds like light seen through cloth. It gave warmth only in memory now, its rays brushing the tops of trees with a weak, gentle gold. A single feather drifted down from an unseen perch. It swirled slowly in the air, barely falling, as if the world itself did not want to disturb the space it occupied. It landed on a bed of leaves and did not stir again. There were no footsteps on the trail, only the marks of those who had passed long before, prints half filled with melted frost, claw marks softened by wind and time. Even they seemed reluctant to remain, fading gently into the leaf-strewn ground. The trees stood tall and quiet. Their branches, now mostly bare, reached upward like open hands, fingers spread to receive the turning of the season. They creaked only slightly, a soft moan of old wood shifting, not from strain, but from memory. They remembered the green. They remembered the snow. A distant mountain stood against the horizon, its peak already dressed in white. The lower slopes still held the warm tones of late fall burnt orange, rust red, and the soft brown of sleeping earth. The colors did not shout. They glowed quietly, the way embers glow when the fire has long since faded. Between these shifting colors, between the warmth just gone and the cold still coming, the world held its breath. There was no push, no pull, only presence. As if nature had paused mid-step and decided to linger a while longer in this in-dash between not in a sheltered glade, a patch of ferns bent slightly beneath a thin coating of frost. Their green had dulled, but they remained delicate and stoic. Ice crystals clung to their edges like lace, and in the morning light they sparkled gently, not brightly, as if whispering their last song before winter's arrival. Even the insects had retreated. No buzz, no hum, only the occasional glint of a spider's thread stretched between two twigs, catching what little light remained. It moved slightly, not from motion, but from the slow breathing of the forest itself. And through it all, time did not pass quickly. It lingered. It curled into corners, filled the gaps between falling leaves and melting frost, rested gently on the backs of sleeping animals and the branches of bare trees. It was not rushing forward. It was settling. This was the stillness between seasons, a soft passage from one world into the next, not marked by storm or flourish, but by quiet surrender, by the hush of water dripping from thawing snow, the slow descent of golden leaves, and the silent gathering of light against the pale sky. And somewhere beneath it all, beneath root and stone, beneath bark and feather, the earth turned slowly, patiently, not to hurry the change, but to carry it, gently and without sound. In the pale light of a winter morning, when the sun was no more than a quiet glow behind the veil of cloud, the hands of the old ones began to move. Not in haste, nor with great force, but in the slow, deliberate rhythm of work that knew no need for speed. They sat in a ring of stones still warm from last night's fire, where the snow had receded slightly in a softened circle of earth. Around them, the world was white and still, but within their quiet circle, the color and texture of creation unfolded like a story retold with care. Feathers lay in small piles upon tanned hide-long tail feathers in shades of soft gray and brilliant blue, downy white tufts from winter birds, and slender quills touched with hints of amber or soot black. They had been gathered one by one, not plucked nor taken in haste, but offered by the birds in molting seasons or found along quiet paths in the underbrush. Each feather had been turned gently in the light, cleaned with care, and placed with others of its kind. Nearby, bundles of sinew, fiber, and twisted bark cord waited beside coils of rawhide and strips of softened fur. A basket of smoked rabbit. Pelts rested at the feet of a woman with long silver-streaked hair, her fingers moving steadily as she braided fine cords into a pattern that had no name but was known by touch. It was the kind of work passed from hand to hand, heart to heart, learned not by instruction, but by repetition, like a song with no words that still managed to linger in the air. A piece of rough-woven cloth lay across her knees. The fiber had been spun from nettle and dogbane, softened by ash-washing, and dyed a deep brown with the bark of alder. The sound of her fingers against the thread was gentle, just a soft rasping, like dry leaves brushing against one another, or the whisper of silk being folded. On the other side of the fire ring, a younger set of hands was laying out a line of feathers in a fan shape. The tips just overlapped, each one placed with care so the pattern grew in quiet arcs. Now and then, a small breath of wind would catch the edges, and the feathers would tremble slightly, as though remembering the wings they once adorned. A thin cord of braided hair was sewn along the base, fastening the feathers together. The stitches were tiny and nearly invisible. When the work was ready, the pieces came together like parts of a dream. A cloak was formed, its base soft hide, supple and warm, lined with short fur turned inward, and the outer layer adorned with feathers arranged in long bands that shimmered slightly when they moved. The down near the collar cradled the neck like cloud. The longer feathers along the hem swayed with the wearer's breath. No part of the animal or bird had been wasted. What had been given was honored, and what had been gathered was cherished. As one woman stood to shake out the finished cloak, it unfolded with a quiet sound like snow falling off a branch, or frost loosening from a windowpane. She placed it across the shoulders of another, whose hands were still working a length of cord. It settled gently, molding to the body with ease, the feathered edges catching the light and sending it flickering across the ground like pale fire. There were no mirrors here, only eyes, but the cloak transformed the shape of the figure. It was not grandeur, but grace, a presence more than a garment, something that recalled the hush of wings, the softness of twilight, and the steadiness of earth beneath snow. It did not speak, but it told a story, of gathering and waiting, of shaping and remembering, of giving, shaped to warmth and beauty in a place where cold and silence reigned. Nearby, a set of boots was being stitched. The leather was thick and softened by oil, lined with hare's fur. The soles were formed from smoked hide, resilient and flexible, able to bend with the curve of a root or the hush of snow. The laces were simple sinew, tied with double knots that could be undone even with cold fingers. The boots would make no sound when walking, only the faint crunch of frost beneath. A child, wrapped in a hooded wrap made of layered fibers and lined with feathers, toddled past the workers, leaving small prints in the snow. The wrap fluttered slightly with each movement, and from a distance it looked as though a tiny bird was walking upright, half in dream, half in light. No one called after the child. There was no need. The snow held the memory of each step, and the forest was kind today. Dot at the edge of the circle. Someone was weaving a narrow path of grass and straw, bound in wide loops that would be used to line the floor of the sleeping huts. The dried blades hissed faintly against each other, and the woven pattern spread outward slowly, like a ripple moving across still water. It was not just a mat. It was the ground itself, made soft and known by hand. There was peace in every motion, a deep, ancient peace that did not rise or fall, but simply lingered, the kind that could only be felt when hands moved together toward something beautiful and useful. No words broke the quiet, but none were needed. The weaving, the stitching, the placing of feather against thread, all of it was a language spoken not with mouths, but with breath and presence. And so the day moved forward, slowly and without rush, as cloaks were finished and paths were laid. The snow fell lightly, barely more than a dusting. The sky remained pale and still, and the people, wrapped in the softness of their handmade cloaks, walked gently across their woven paths, into the white hush of a world patiently waiting for spring. The night had arrived quietly, like a gentle breath across the land. Snow no longer fell, though its memory still covered the earth in folds of soft white. Above, the sky stretched wide and endless, wrapped in velvet darkness. The stars began to bloom one by one at first, then in clusters, until the entire sky shimmered with ancient light. There was no wind, no voice of owl or wolf, only the vast and perfect stillness that settled over the forest like a soft blanket down in the down. Shallow valley, where the snow had begun to loosen its grip, a small stream whispered its way through stones. Meltwater, born from the warmth of many days and the slow yielding of ice, had gathered in quiet runnels. The stream was narrow and gentle, its course curved like a lazy thought, winding between roots and patches of damp earth. Small patches of moss had begun to appear at its edge, green like dreams remembered in morning light. The water was clear, so clear it seemed not to exist at all. Only the movement gave it away. Beneath the surface, smooth stones lay in quiet company. Some were speckled with mineral traces, others worn pale from time. The flow of the water did not rush, did not crash, but moved like a lullaby. It hummed softly over the rocks, curving around each shape with a patience that only water knows. Now and then, a tiny ripple would catch a twig or curve over a leaf. But even these movements seemed like part of some old and silent rhythm. Above the stream, the stars looked down and found themselves reflected. The surface of the water, so still in the colder hollows, became a mirror for the sky. There, the constellations rested not sharp, but softened, like memories told beside a fading fire. The water trembled just slightly, touched by air too light to feel. And so the stars flickered on its surface, not in fear or in hurry, but in a quiet dance that seemed made for those who could watch with still hearts. Someone had come to sit beside the stream. They did not speak, nor did they stir the water. Wrapped in a cloak of softened hide and lined with the down of winter birds, the figure rested upon a dry patch of earth, where the roots of an old pine arched like a bench. Their hands were empty. Their breath was slow. The firelight from the camp behind them did not reach here. Only the stars and water gave shape to the night. The figure looked not up at the sky, but down into the pool where stars had gathered. It was not for study or understanding. It was not for dreaming. It was simply to see, to witness the soft miracle of light floating on water, light that had traveled across time and cold space to rest here, just for a while, before fading again into morning. Somewhere nearby, a thin branch cracked gently under. Its own weight. A bit of ice slid from a stone and vanished into the stream without a splash. And still the stars remained, now shifting slightly as the meltwater moved. Some stones glistened as if they too held constellations, mineral flecks catching the starlight and echoing it softly beneath the flow. No animal moved. The world seemed to have agreed upon silence. In this moment, there was no need for warmth or speech, no need for fire or tools or food. There was only the water and the stars, and the soft meeting of both in a kind of time that did not belong to hours or seasons, but to something more endless and calm. The figure by the stream leaned slightly, and with a slow hand placed a small stone into the shallows. The ripple it caused was barely more than a sigh, but it stirred the reflection, made the stars blink and wander for a moment. Then the water settled, and the light returned. That stone would remain there now, perhaps until the next melt, perhaps longer. It did not matter. All things moved slowly here. All things returned in time, got far across the clearing. Another pool had formed a low hollow in the roots of a fallen tree. Here, too, the water reflected the sky, though in pieces fragmented by bark and the shadows of twigs. It was as though the stars had scattered themselves again, this time across a canvas of old wood and sleeping ground. Even in broken form, they shimmered. The person by the stream rose gently, brushing a bit of dampness from their garment. They walked slowly along the edge of the meltwater, their steps quiet, not for stealth, but because the world itself asked for softness. They paused beside another shallow curve of water and watched how it wound around a pebble. The current was no stronger than a breath, yet it shaped the land grain by grain. Behind them, the camp rested in silence. The fires were low now, covered with ash to save their coals. Tents of hide curved like shadows in the starlight. The air inside would still hold warmth from the day's labor and the presence of many bodies. Sleep had come to most, gently and without resistance. But here, beside the water, time moved differently. It stretched like the sky without boundary. The person stood and watched, not for answers or signs, but for the simple beauty of what was. The stars above and the stars below, each carrying light too old to name, each resting just for a moment on the Meltwater, before morning came to take them away again. And when they finally turned to walk back toward the camp, the path behind them did not disappear. It remained, faintly marked in the frost softened ground, like a memory that lingers not in the mind, but in the quiet space between moments. The stream continued its quiet journey. The stars remained for a while longer, and the Meltwater, reflecting both, carried the night forward in silence, as if offering the world a final blessing before sleep. The day leaned gently toward its end. There was no sudden dimming, no call to hurry, only the slow, deep breath of the earth as the sun drifted downward. The light, once high and golden, now spread wide across the land in a long, softened sweepless. A beam, then a whisper, touching the tops of trees, the edges of rocks, the quiet curve of a sleeping hill. Each shape seemed to exhale, and the world became quieter with every passing minute. At the edge of the clearing, long shadows stretched across the ground. They moved not with haste, but like threads of memory, lengthening slowly over frost-kissed grass. The trunks of the old pines cast patterns across the path, and the tall rocks beside the camp seemed to lean slightly, as if listening to the hush that now filled the sky. A low sun settled near the horizon. Its light had changed from bright and commanding to something softer, almost woven, like the first folds of a blanket pulled across tired shoulders. The colors shifted too. The sky, once pale blue and vast, now deepened into tones of honey and ash, peach, and soft plum. The trees held these colors in their branches, as if storing them for the long night ahead. The birds, who earlier had flitted from branch to branch with short calls and rustling wings, now fell silent. They did not fly away, but rather paused, tucked within the branches, their feathers drawn close, their movements small. No song called out to mark the day's end. There was no need. The hush itself was enough. In the center of the camp, the last tasks of the day moved slowly. A few pieces of wood were gathered without words. A hand smoothed the edge of a hide. Footsteps passed over packed snow and softening dirt. The warmth of the fire began to rise, not as a flame, but as a glow, waiting patiently for night to come. The scent of smoke and damp bark hung low in the air, neither sharp nor heavy, only present, like a memory folded into the dusk. A figure stepped out from the shelter's edge, carrying a smooth piece of bone in one hand and a small bundle of dried grass in the other. They knelt near the fire circle and began arranging kindling with unhurried hands. There was no rush. The sun still touched the tops of the far hills, and the sky had not yet gone dark. It was a time between neither day nor night, but something softer, stretched long and quiet, like a low song before sleep. Beyond the camp, the land opened in every direction. Hills curved gently into distance, and old boulders sat like forgotten thoughts among thickets of bare shrub. The snow that remained caught the last light in subtle gleams, not bright enough to shine, but enough to glow faintly, as if the earth itself held a memory of the sun. Even the bare branches, dry and motionless, held tiny beads of melting frost that glimmered like eyes, watching the fading day dot up above. A single star appeared, not with fanfare, but with quiet certainty. It did not demand attention. It simply arrived, steady and small, like a reminder that the night was waiting just beyond the sky's last breath. Soon it would be joined by others. But for now, it lingered alone, watching over the shadows that gathered gently below at the edge of the stream. Meltwater moved slowly, quieter than before. The ripples that had danced in afternoon light now slid in longer, darker curves. Reflections, blurred and softened, turning into streaks of deep blue and silver. Stones beneath the surface seemed less solid, more like shapes drawn in passing, waiting to vanish into night. A blanket was spread near the fire, one of woven fiber and stitched hide, with a surface worn smooth from use. A few figures gathered, there not for story or feast, but simply to sit. They faced the open horizon, where the last edge of sun had begun to fall behind the land. Their faces held no expression, but stillness, as if this quieting of the world required nothing more than attention. They did not speak. They only watched as the earth folded itself into dusk. Farther off, the tall grasses stood still. Even the wind had paused, as if it too respected this gentle closing of the day. Shadows thickened at their roots, and the soft colors of sky poured downward like watercolor soaked into cloth. It was the kind of light that never lasted long, but always lingered in memory, warm on the edge, cool underneath, neither bright nor dim, only soft. One of the children, not yet asleep, sat with legs curled beneath a fur wrap. Their eyes blinked slowly, caught between wakefulness and dream. They leaned against an older figure, who rested a steady hand on their shoulder. The gesture was not to guide sleep, only to share in stillness. This was not a time for telling stories or naming stars. This was a time for allowing the day to end and the quiet to settle. And then, as the final sliver of sunlight dipped beyond the farthest ridge, the sky changed once more. It did not darken all at once, but folded into layers deep blue beneath a stretch of fading rose, silver threads brushing the tops of trees. The horizon no longer burned, but exhaled. And into this exhale came the hush of earth and air, the soft weight of night beginning its slow descent. In the stillness, a single feather drifted from a high branch. No bird, no motion, only the quiet surrender of something once held aloft. It spun gently in the cooling air, touched briefly by the last light, and came to rest in the grass beside the fire. No one noticed. Or perhaps they did, and simply said nothing. The feather, like everything else, had found its place in the soft gathering of evening. And the earth, wrapped now in long shadows and gentle dark, seemed to sigh slow, content, and ready. The horizon had softened, the voices had faded, and all that remained was the slow arrival of night, folding over the land like a warm, familiar blanket. The sky had become a soft and endless gray, quiet and without direction. It did not press down nor stretch upward. It simply hovered there, still and full, like a woolen shawl laid across the shoulders of the world. Snow was falling again slow, and without hurry, each flake drifting with gentle turns in the air. There was no pattern to it, no urgency, only presence. The air did not sting. It whispered, carried gently on the breath of a breeze, so even and calm that it seemed to come from nowhere and go nowhere, only existing. Below the falling snow, the land stretched wide and open, blanketed in white. Trees stood as long, softened shapes, their outlines rounded with frost and their branches heavy with time. In the distance, a narrow trail could be seen winding through the stillness. It was not made of worn dirt or broken ground, but of footprints, evenly spaced, each one a soft imprint in the fresh surface. They passed across a clearing where snow had only just begun to settle, and led onward to a line of trees. Standing quietly beyond. Each footprint showed the touch of a heel, the arc of a toe, the softness of a step pressed into snow. There were no signs of haste, no turning back, no wandering, just forward movement, simple and sure, like thoughts walking quietly through a dream. The feet had moved slowly, not dragging, not pausing, only drifting ahead, one after the next, in peaceful rhythm. And now, with each passing moment, snow began to settle deeper. First, the outer edges faded. Then the impression itself softened. One by one, the prints were covered, not vanished, but gently tucked away. Snow continued to fall without sound. The breeze, constant as breath, rushed across the trail. It brought no cold that cut the skin, only the soft persistence of change. And with each moment, the shapes in the snow lost their form. Soon the entire trail became a pale suggestion, where something had passed but was no longer visible. The trail did not end in any grand moment. It simply blurred until the path was no longer separate from the field around it. No one had paused to mark the end. No glance had been cast back. There had been no final word, no gesture. Yet somehow, the silence they left behind was not empty, but full, as though the land had memorized their passage, and now repeated it back with each falling flake, echoing the rhythm of steps in the hush of snow. The trees did not move. They stood tall and still. Between them, no bird stirred. There were no songs left to sing. All had settled into quiet far away. The wind passed through the branches, like a hand moving across cloth slow, and even ever pushing. The sound it carried was not a cry, not a wail, but something softer, like water flowing through stone without rushing. Among the rocks, there were no more fires. The flames had gone out long ago. Ash rested where warmth had once danced. The ground held it gently, letting it cool beneath the snow. The trail rose slightly along a ridge. At its top, there had once been a view, a broad sweep of earth and sky, where the future stretched out like untouched snow. But now the horizon was lost. The snowfall had pulled a soft curtain over the world, and the distance no longer called. What lay beyond was not needed. It could wait or sleep, or simply fade like a forgotten name. Each traveler had carried with them only what was light hide, wrappings, small tools tucked beneath the folds, and the memory of warmth. Their movement was not of struggle. It was not a battle against the cold, but a quiet surrender to it. As they walked, the falling snow wrapped them one by one in its quiet white and made them a part of the land. No one hurried. No one spoke. Breaths rose in small clouds, slow and measured. Bodies moved like drifting shapes across a soft canvas, and little by little they lost distinction. A fur-lined shoulder, a bone-tied braid, a bare hand brushing against the snow-laden brush. These details blurred until they became the same color as the air, as the earth. The snow did not erase them. It accepted them. Time stretched. The sun, if it still remained, had long disappeared behind the thick sky. Its light was scattered and dull, leaving behind only the gentlest glow. Shadows no longer fell. They rose, slowly blended with the snow, and vanished. And beneath all of it, the land remained unchanged in its silence. At the bottom of the hill, where the trail passed between two wide stones, the final visible prints rested briefly. A patch of grass, stubborn against the cold, had remained uncovered long enough to cradle those last steps. But even this moment held no ceremony. The snow approached slowly, drawn like breath in a sleeping chest, and covered the prints one flake at a time, with the patience of something that had seen everything before. The trail disappeared, not erased, not forgotten, simply covered. A soft blanket over memory, over presence, over motion. Behind them, the world continued, but it no longer held urgency. Only the falling snow remained, and the silence that followed, vast and complete. There were no more signs, no more voices, no more movement. The land had become still once again, as it had always wished to be. Yet within that stillness, there was fullness. The kind of fullness that comes not from sound or presence, but from acceptance. A final breath taken without fear. A final moment left untouched. And though the footprints were gone from sight, their rhythm lingered, like the hum of a dream. Still echoing in sleep, the snow fell. The earth rested. And above it all, the sky remained gray, soft, and unbroken. There was nothing more to say, nothing more to do. Only this: the last steps now sleep beneath snow. In the quietest part of the day, when the sky held no more color, but had not yet surrendered to night, the land softened into something like a memory, like a gentle dream. Snow no longer fell from above. It simply lingered in the air, suspended, like breath held too long, weightless and waiting. It didn't fall or drift, only stayed. Shadows stretched over the quiet plain, not sharp or dark, but like long, slow sighs, easing over the sleeping contours of earth. The ice, once solid and loud with ancient footsteps, had turned to silk beneath the sky. Its edges had softened. Its voice no longer rang, but whispered, faint and distant, like a story only half-remembered. The great sheet of white, which had once seemed to stretch forever, now felt like a gentle recollection left behind. There were no tracks to follow. No flickers of life disturbed its surface. Only silence remained, laying across the world like a heavy wool blanket. The trees at the edge of the field stood quietly. They no longer reached for the sky. They no longer resisted the wind. They only stood, perfectly still, as if they had always known that stillness was not the absence of movement, but its final expression. The wind itself, once restless, had tired. It no longer whispered through the branches, no longer tugged at. The snow, it passed like a thought fading before it finished. Deep beneath the snow, the earth remained. It had not changed. Ancient roots curled in sleep, never stirring. Stones pressed gently into the soil, holding the imprint of fires long gone cold and paths no longer walked. Everything that had come before, scrapers shaped by hand, huts built from mammoth bone, footprints dried into clay, had not vanished, only rested beneath time. The land had not forgotten. It only dreamed now. And in those slow, endless dreams, the first footsteps returned not as images, but as a feeling, like the chill of wind before dawn. Where once there were drums and flickers of flame, now there was only sky wide and pale and without direction. It held no sun, no stars, only the quiet edge where shadow blurred into snow and snow into air. The final sounds, footfalls, voices, even breath had faded long ago, but there was no sorrow in that fading. Only the deep hush of something completed. A silence so full it felt like it could carry every story ever walked across the ice dot. No one remained to mark this ending. No stones were raised. No words were etched into walls. But the land itself remembered. The bend in a frozen stream still carried the shape of fingers once dipped into its water. A scattering of smooth pebbles under the ice still held the rhythm of ancient laughter. Even the bark of a snow-wrapped pine knew the warmth of a resting hand, paused before another journey. These weren't stories told aloud. They were quiet remembrances, held in place not by voice, but by time. A peace had come to the land, not because of victory, but because peace had always been there, waiting for the steps to slow, the firelight to fade, the hands to rest. The end had not come suddenly. It did not crash down. It arrived slowly, gently, like sleep. The ice no longer groaned beneath the weight of passing life. Its tension had eased. Now it dreamed. And in those dreams, it released all that had ever passed over it. As the light dimmed further, the whole world seemed to exhale. What was once? Sharp grew soft. Hills became waves. Branches drooped. Even the air thickened with stillness. And time, which had always followed closely, seemed to stop walking. There was no more distance to cover, no more directions to follow. The story had finished, not with a word, but with a sigh. A long, slow breath like snow, settling undisturbed in the final hour, when even the birds had tucked their heads beneath wings and no creature stirred beneath the trees. The land whispered to itself in silence. It wasn't a sound or even a thought, but a quiet presence and understanding that everything had come to its gentle conclusion. And what might come next could wait. There was no beginning ahead. Only the comfort of not needing to begin again. It was not a door closing, but a curtain softly drawn taut. So now, as this long story nears its final breath, let us not mourn the ending. Let us not search the snow for footprints already vanished. Let us simply pause in this quiet, snowy place and rest. Let your shoulders lower. Let the tension of the day fall away like loose snow drifting from tall branches. Close your eyes, not in sadness, but in acceptance. The path is finished. The winds have gone still. The world, once so full of motion, now simply rests. You are safe now. There is no journey left to walk, no direction still waiting on the edge of thought. You've come farther than memory holds, farther than the cold remembers. No map is needed. In your hand, no flame needs tending. There are no more forks in the path. The horizon has faded into white, and the sky holds no pull, only quiet. All that remains now is stillness, complete and soft, like snow untouched beneath stars that no longer shine. Only weight, no fire, no footsteps. Only the hush of the world, breathing its last breath for the night. This hush is not empty. It is full of echoes, of warmth, of stories folded gently into the soil. The world is not gone. It is only sleeping. Every echo, every ancient step has led here to this place of peace. Let go now. Let the burdens slip away like snow off sloped roofs. Let the last thoughts of the day dissolve like frost on your palm. They are not lost. They are home now, within the silence. You have heard all that needed to be said. The world welcomes you. Not with words, but with rest. You have come far. Across stories, across frozen times, through memories carved into ice. And now you are here in the pause after the last line, in the breath between dreams. Let your body soften. Let your thoughts slow, like a river thickening beneath moonlight. There is no more to hold. The land sleeps now, and so may you. Good night, dear listener. Sleep well, and until next time, may your dreams be gentle and slow.